latest headlines have paralyzed the Capitol. With recording devices capturing every moment, the foremost law enforcement officer in the United States faces a blunt inquiry. For exactly 1 minute and 7 seconds, she is utterly incapable of providing a straightforward reply. There are no denials, no rationalizations, only a profound quiet. Then, fixing her gaze upon the image resting on the table, she remarks, "That is a magnificent photograph. I truly adore that picture." In a split second, an ordinary Senate oversight proceeding transforms into a monumental event. The reason is that the events that transpired during that executive mansion banquet might unravel everything that subsequently unfolds. Inside the Washington, D.C. Senate Judiciary Committee chamber, the mood is palpably fraught even prior to the interrogation's commencement. Positioned before the legislators is Attorney General Pam Bondi, arguably among the most polarizing judicial figures serving within the administration of Donald Trump. Directly opposite her sits Senator Richard Blumenthal, an ex-prosecutor celebrated for his incisive, systematic probing. This isn't mere political drama. This is constitutional scrutiny, and every individual present is acutely aware of the stakes. Blumenthal initiates his questioning with composure, no elevated tones, no theatrical grandstanding. He subsequently positions a printed image upon the dais. It depicts Bondi seated at a White House dining event, positioned a mere 2 spots away from the president. The chronology of this gathering is precisely what causes the chamber to fall utterly silent. As the senator notes, this particular banquet occurred the very evening before judicial maneuvers concerning the former head of the FBI, James Comey, transformed into a massive national controversy. Following this setup comes the pivotal inquiry. Was the subject of James Comey brought up during that dinner? Did the chief executive convey anything to you regarding that specific case? These are uncomplicated, unvarnished words. In the nation's capital, queries of this nature typically encounter pre-planned repudiations, dense judicial jargon, or swift interjections. However, on this particular occasion, an entirely different reaction unfolds. Bondi casts her eyes downward. She scrutinizes the photograph, and subsequently, a smile crosses her face. "That is a magnificent photograph. I truly adore that picture." The atmosphere in the chamber visibly alters. This is not a valid reply. It does not even approximate a satisfactory response. Blumenthal reiterates his inquiry. Was the topic of Comey conversed about? Did the chief executive bring up the matter again? Once again, Bondi refuses to say yes. She refuses to say no. Instead, she deflects by stating that numerous individuals were in attendance, the entire cabinet was present, and it was a massive gathering. Still, a definitive reply remains elusive. At that juncture, she utters the phrase that fundamentally redirects the trajectory of the proceeding. "I am choosing not to divulge any dialogues I may or may not have engaged in with the President of the United States." That declaration resonates with massive consequence because it accomplishes a critical function. It never refutes that the dialogue actually took place. It merely declines to discuss it within the context of a congressional hearing. That nuance is extraordinarily significant. Journalists rapidly strike their keyboards, aides lean forward with intense focus, and lawmakers trade significant looks. The absolute quiet that ensues feels almost more deafening than the spoken dialogue itself. This is not because anyone can definitively substantiate illicit behavior at that exact second, but rather because the most straightforward reply possible, "No, it never came up," fails to materialize. Blumenthal detects this hesitation instantly. He restrains from any triumphant gestures. Instead, he intensifies his probing. He introduces a recent public declaration from Trump advocating for punitive measures targeting explicitly identified political adversaries, notably utilizing the exact phrase, "no more delay." The senator questions whether Bondi engaged in communications with the White House following that specific decree. Once more, she declines. The broadcast lenses continue to document everything. The proceeding has ceased to be solely about a singular banquet photograph. It has evolved into a fundamental debate regarding whether the Department of Justice is operating with true autonomy or yielding to partisan influence. And then, just when it appears Bondi might reclaim dominance over the room, Blumenthal unveils a completely novel front. He begins listing specific corporate consolidation inquiries, the ousting of key personnel, and one highly connected political lobbyist. That is the exact moment the situation detonates. To comprehend why this exchange became so intensely combustible, one must grasp what is truly being evaluated here. It is not a dinner menu, nor is it a photograph, but the fundamental autonomy of the American legal apparatus. Within the United States, the Attorney General commands the Department of Justice. That specific office is mandated to execute the law devoid of partisan directives originating from the White House. Presidents undeniably appoint attorneys general, yes, but upon assuming the role, these officials are expected to preserve a strict distance from prosecutorial indictments and legal determinations. That core doctrine is perfectly why Blumenthal's interrogation was so surgically targeted. If a sitting president openly insists upon legal prosecutions, subsequently convenes in private with the nation's supreme law enforcement official, and then consequential judicial measures are enacted shortly thereafter, critics instantaneously pose the identical inquiry. Was justice administered with objective independence, or was it corrupted by political motives? That is the dark shadow looming over the hearing. Bondi's defenders present a vastly contrasting argument. They contend that dialogues between a chief executive and an attorney general can encompass a multitude of perfectly lawful matters: national security, logistical scheduling, administrative priorities, and overarching legal strategy. They maintain that declining to divulge confidential presidential communications is normal and may reflect executive confidentiality rather than an admission of guilt. Moreover, this defense is supported by historical precedent. Multiple administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have routinely thwarted congressional demands for internal White House conversations. But then, the hearing widens. Blumenthal introduces apprehensions regarding anti-monopoly regulations, the sector of the government tasked with evaluating massive corporate consolidations and market fairness issues. He cites reports pertaining to the acquisition agreement between Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Juniper Networks, while raising questions surrounding internal disagreements among veteran career officials. Following this, he explicitly names Brian Ballard, a prominent lobbyist possessing deep-rooted affiliations with Trump-era political maneuverings and elite Florida power circles. Why does that matter? Because within Washington, shifts in personnel and rulings on corporate mergers are never viewed in isolation. They are interpreted as overt signals: who gets advancements, who is removed, which deals move fast, and which deals stall. They highlight which names consistently appear near centers of influence. Bondi fiercely repudiates the implication. She proclaims that she will refuse to discuss personnel matters or pending judicial proceeding. She accuses her critics of twisting standard administrative governance into a grand conspiracy. At this juncture, the moment turns deeply personal. Following relentless pressure, Bondi retaliates forcefully against Blumenthal, resurrecting his old controversy concerning past assertions regarding his military service during the Vietnam era. "You lied about your military service," she declares. The room erupts. For her supporters, it represents an undeniable display of strength. For her critics, it is a blatant maneuver of deflection. And that is precisely why the confrontation goes viral. It is not because anyone proved a crime, nor because a smoking gun was unearthed, but because viewers witness two deeply contradictory narratives collide in real time. Story 1. Democrats argue the Justice Department is enduring aggressive politicization. Story 2. Republicans argue that oversight inquiries are being weaponized to generate partisan spectacle. The general public sees an entirely different phenomenon: unanswered questions. In politics, queries that go unanswered can be more devastating than bad replies. The instantaneous fallout is entirely political. Viral testimonies forge public narratives at a pace far exceeding any official government reports. A solitary video clip possesses the power to dictate societal perception for months on end. For Bondi, the visual of a direct question accompanied by hesitation becomes replayed endlessly across news shows, digital platforms, and campaign advertisements. The subsequent consequence is systemic. Every forthcoming decision finalized by the Justice Department now confronts added scrutiny. If prosecutors proceed with fervor, critics inevitably question whether partisan politics is involved. Conversely, if they proceed slowly, supporters accuse political opponents of deliberate obstruction. Trust deteriorates from both directions. The third consequence is deeply personal for ordinary Americans. When people forfeit their conviction that laws are administered impartially, they cease to believe that governmental institutions protect them equally. This disillusionment affects judicial juries, democratic elections, regulatory compliance, and civic trust, everything that holds a free democracy together. Subsequently, the longer timeline materializes. By April 2026, Bondi is ousted from the role amidst expansive controversies, reportedly connected to internal administrative disputes and the mishandling of sensitive matters. Analysts debate the exact reasons, yet pivotal moments like this hearing remain part of the public record because they crystallize an issue vastly more significant than one single official. Power despises illumination. The image from the White House dinner, the evaded question, the refusal to issue a denial, the vitriolic counteroffensive, none of it definitively proves a criminal plot. Nevertheless, it reveals exactly how modern Washington operates. When pressure intensifies, every pause morphs into evidence for someone, and every period of silence transforms into a headline. That is precisely why this episode matters beyond any individual or political party. Because the authentic battle is not merely Bondi against Blumenthal, it is an existential test of whether the American populace still believes the legal system can stand completely apart from partisan politics. And once that conviction begins to crack, repairing it is infinitely more difficult than winning any congressional hearing. If you found this analytical breakdown valuable, subscribe, like, and comment below. Was this silence an act of caution or something far more profound? What transformed this inquiry into an unforgettable event was not a dramatic confession. It wasn't leaked documents. It wasn't an explosive resignation announced minutes later. It was a phenomenon far more dangerous in politics: absolute uncertainty. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, Washington bifurcated into two distinct camps overnight. One contingent maintained that Bondi did exactly what any attorney general should do. They asserted that she shielded privileged presidential communications, declined to legitimize partisan attacks, and refused to permit senators to transform delicate judicial matters into political theater. From their perspective, the hearing was an orchestrated trap. From its inception, a made-for-TV ambush engineered to manufacture a sensational clip, not uncover the truth. The opposing side perceived an entirely different reality. They witnessed a premier law enforcement official utterly incapable of delivering the simplest response available. If the topic of James Comey was truly never discussed, why not say so immediately? Why hesitate? Why redirect? Why escalate into personal character attacks instead of closing the matter with a single sentence? And that is the lingering question still overshadowing the entire interaction. Because during crisis moments, the public rarely remembers every intricate argument. They remember instincts. They remember body language. They remember the pauses. They remember who projected confidence and who appeared visibly cornered. That is the reason those 67 seconds wielded vastly more power than the subsequent several minutes of shouting. Political professionals comprehend this reality more profoundly than anyone. A clean, definitive denial can halt negative momentum. A composed explanation can decelerate an unfolding scandal. However, hesitation creates a void, and in politics, empty space gets instantaneously filled by opponents, commentators, investigators, and millions of digital viewers online. Within a matter of hours, clips of the hearing spread across all media platforms. Some focused on Bondi's refusal to reply, while others celebrated her fierce attack on Blumenthal. Supporters labeled her fearless. Critics branded her as profoundly evasive. Yet, almost everyone found consensus on a singular point. The confrontation fundamentally changed her public image. No longer just an attorney general defending policy, she was now the face of a deeper philosophical argument regarding whether the Department of Justice possessed the capacity to remain insulated from presidential politics. And that specific issue does not vanish with one hearing. It shadows every subsequent indictment, every dropped case, every merger review, every firing, and every closed-door meeting. The moment doubt enters the room, it infiltrates every future administrative decision. That represents the real cost of moments like this. It is not limited to one viral video or one unfavorable headline, but the slow, inexorable corrosion of public trust. Democracies survive when citizens maintain the conviction that rules apply equally to the powerful and the powerless alike. The exact instant individuals suspect that justice is contingent upon proximity to power, the entire system begins to weaken from the inside. Consequently, years from the present, a vast majority of people may fail to recall the precise wording utilized during the exchange. They might forget who talked over whom. They might even fail to remember the specific date. Nonetheless, they will forever retain this memory. A senator posed a straightforward question, a photograph rested upon the table, and for 67 excruciating seconds, one of the most powerful legal officials in America could not, or would not, furnish a straight answer. If you desire more immersive, geopolitical and political dissections told like a thriller, subscribe, like, and share your perspective below. Was Bondi shielding the presidency, or was she merely protecting herself? Long after the shouting fades, after the headlines transition to novel topics, and after fresh scandals supplant the old, instances like this continue to matter immensely because they lay bare the true behavior of power when challenged in public. Washington frequently communicates through a lexicon of rules, protocols, and accountability. Yet, when subjected to immense pressure, the real test is much simpler. Can leaders answer direct queries directly? Can governmental institutions genuinely demonstrate their allegiance to the law over their allegiance to the individuals in charge of them? Can societal trust endure when every controversy devolves into hyper-partisan tribal combat? That is the core reason this interrogation struck such a nerve. It was never exclusively about Pam Bondi. It was never exclusively about Richard Blumenthal. It wasn't even exclusively about James Comey. It centered entirely on whether Americans still maintain faith that a distinct boundary exists separating politics and justice. When that boundary remains clear, the republic functions smoothly. Elections conclude, courts issue rulings, regulatory agencies investigate, and while citizens may disagree, they ultimately respect the process. Conversely, when that boundary becomes blurred, every administrative decision is interpreted through a lens of suspicion. Every legal prosecution appears politically motivated to someone. Every acquittal looks rigged to someone else. Every legislative inquiry morphs into theatrical performance instead of legitimate oversight. That is exactly where the danger grows, because institutional trust does not collapse instantaneously. It erodes piece by piece. One unanswered query here, one deliberate deflection there, one bureaucratic official declaring, "I can't discuss that." One side erupts in celebration while the opposing side seethes with rage. Then, abruptly, millions of people completely lose their conviction that any institution remains neutral. That is the exact mechanism by which democratic societies become exhausted. The Bondi hearing transformed into a cultural symbol for this precise reason. Her supporters perceived a valiant resistance against partisan aggression. Her critics observed cowardly avoidance under intense scrutiny. However, beneath both of these arguments lay a far more profound reality. Confidence in institutions has grown so fragile that a mere pause possesses the power to ignite a national debate. Contemplate that reality, not a verdict, not a piece of legislation, not a war, a pause. That illustrates just how extraordinarily sensitive the political apparatus has become. Unless leaders manage to rebuild credibility with radical transparency, unwavering discipline, and consistent actions, these incidents will inevitably multiply. The future will yield an increase in hearings, an uptick in viral confrontations, a surge in sweeping accusations, and a severe deficit of trust. Therefore, the ultimate lesson does not revolve around a single administration or a solitary senator. It revolves around the future of governance itself. If the administration of justice appears partisan, partisanship will inevitably devour justice. If factual truth is treated as optional, outrage will become a permanent state. And if the populace ceases to believe that answers possess any value, then silence emerges victorious. If you crave more high-stakes, purely factual political analyses with no fluff, subscribe, like, and comment below. Has America entered an epoch where silence wields more influence than truth? Within Washington, officials frequently operate under the illusion that they are fighting for the next news cycle. They continuously prepare for the imminent hearing, the impending headline, the subsequent hostile question, or the next camera angle. Yet, history does not evaluate individuals based upon the strategy of the day. History judges them based upon what remains when the noise is finally gone. And what remains from this specific moment is starkly simple. A question was asked, and an answer never arrived. Everything else, the manufactured outrage, the defensive posturing, the partisan spin, the broadcasted television debates, the social media warfare was constructed entirely around that single, irrefutable fact. For the loyalists defending Pam Bondi, history may record that she held her ground against vicious political attack, firmly refused to disclose private presidential communications, and steadfastly refused to allow Senate opponents to dictate the parameters of her testimony. They will argue she exhibited immense toughness in a city that reveres toughness above almost everything else. Conversely, for her critics, the historical judgment appears far harsher. They will assert that during a juncture when the nation demanded clarity, it received evasion. When oversight necessitated transparency, it encountered calculation. When public trust required reassurance, it was met with anger. Both factions will perpetually advocate for their case, but history often ignores the arguments of those who shout the loudest, choosing instead to focus on the microscopic moments that reveal the deepest truths. A hesitation, a downward glance, a smile at the photograph, a conscious refusal to issue a denial. Those granular details achieve permanence because they are immune to being spun away. They were witnessed, unedited, as they occurred in real time. This demonstrates precisely why congressional hearings continue to hold immense weight, even in an era saturated with cynicism. They compel power out into the open. They forge permanent records. They preserve contradictions. They empower subsequent investigators, media professionals, historians, and average citizens to revisit the events without relying solely upon fragile memory. The written transcript endures. The video recording endures. The deafening silence endures. That reality might represent the most uncomfortable truth for every powerful individual within the government. They can delay replies, redirect inquiries, launch attacks on opponents, and strategically run out the clock, but they lack the power to erase the moment itself. Decades from today, individuals may fiercely debate the underlying motives. They might argue endlessly over whether Bondi was prudent, strategic, or simply cornered. They may never uncover the contents of every private conversation that transpired behind locked doors. They will, however, possess absolute certainty regarding what unfolded in the public eye. They will know that when a direct query struck the nerve center of executive influence, all certainty vanished. That represents the ultimate verdict of history. It is neither a declaration of guilt nor a proclamation of innocence. It is simply unanswered. And unanswered mysteries possess a peculiar habit of resurfacing when leaders least anticipate them. If you are seeking more cinematic, immersive breakdowns detailing real political power struggles, subscribe, like, and comment below. Do unresolved questions inflict more severe damage upon leaders than fully proven scandals? The events that transpired inside that hearing room resonate far beyond the scope of one administration, one senator, or one embattled official. It serves as a glaring warning to every prospective leader who operates under the assumption that sheer power alone can control public perception. Power holds the ability to command schedules. It can shape messaging. It can hire vast armies of lawyers, advisors, spokespeople, strategists, and devoted allies. It has the ability to delay disclosures, restrict the scope of statements, and flood the broadcasting networks with endless distractions. However, pure power suffers from one glaring weakness. It cannot force the populace to forget what they witnessed with their own eyes. They watched Richard Blumenthal position a photograph upon the table. They watched Pam Bondi meticulously study it. They watched a blunt question being articulated in full view of the public. Crucially, they watched as the anticipated answer failed to ever fully materialize. That is the exact reason the moment has achieved such longevity. It was not due to it being the most deafening clash in Washington's history. It was not. It was not because it unveiled a final legal conclusion. It did not. It achieved longevity because it flawlessly encapsulated a phenomenon that modern politics wrestles with every single day: the ever-expanding gap separating the rhetoric officials speak and what citizens intuitively sense. The public inherently recognizes when someone is merely buying time. People know when complex language is being utilized to sidestep substance. People recognize when anger suddenly arrives simply because the initial inquiry was deemed excessively dangerous to answer with transparency. That visceral instinct is remarkably potent. It can sometimes be imperfect, certainly. It can sometimes be partisan, without a doubt. Yet, its power remains immense, and leaders disregard it at their own ultimate peril. Every sovereign administration relies upon a crucial reserve of collective public trust. Once that reserve is drained, every subsequent maneuver becomes exponentially harder. Every explanation is met with doubt. Every public announcement is intensely scrutinized. Every minor mistake is interpreted as undeniable proof of something much larger. That is the exact process by which institutional legitimacy weakens. The essential takeaway for future presidents, attorneys general, cabinet secretaries, and lawmakers is brutally uncompromising. In the immediate term, dodging the issue might protect you. In the long term, absolute clarity protects the institutions. Supplying a clean answer in the heat of the moment can avert years of pervasive suspicion. Conversely, a refusal in that same moment can create years of rampant speculation. That is exactly why this particular proceeding remains highly relevant across all party lines. Tomorrow, it could easily be Democrats under the intense glare of questioning. Next year, it may be Republicans. The faces may change, but the chamber remains identical. The cameras remain fixated, and the inherent stakes remain constant. Because inevitably, every powerful individual arrives at the exact same crossroads. Tell the truth with absolute clarity, seek refuge behind administrative process, or permit silence to speak for you. And silence invariably communicates volumes more than those in command ever anticipate. If you crave further authentic, gripping analyses of the political landscape told like a thriller, please subscribe, leave a like, and comment below. If you were physically present within that room, what message did those exact 67 seconds convey to you?